Good day, and welcome back to the Queer Pridecast. The online spaces we use today to meet, talk, and build community are largely owned by big tech and venture capital. Over time, these platforms have become highly commercialized, turning our personal connections into profit. Our guest today wants to change that. Don Jaco Yu is a Berlin-based researcher who studies how technology impacts society. He's the founder of Meetmarket, a new dating app built to challenge major platforms like Grindr and Sniffies. Unlike those other apps, Meetmarket does not store your personal information, emails, or passwords on a central server. Instead, it uses a decentralized system, keeping your data encrypted right on your own device. Don argues that corporate ownership forces a kind of digital gentrification. When apps prioritize profit, user privacy and community safety usually get pushed aside. To combat this, Meetmarket is adopting a steward ownership model designed specifically to resist venture capital takeovers. Today, we are talking about the business of dating apps, data privacy, and how we can build online spaces that answer to users rather than corporate shareholders. Hi, Don. Welcome to the show. And thank you for saying this.
Thank you.
So I wanted to ask, you warned about venture capital taking over apps like Sniffies, and you called it the gentrification of queer platforms. So could you explain to us what that exactly means, and how does Meetmarket's steward ownership model basically stop big businesses from buying up our private lives?
Yeah, so it's such a big problem for digital platforms, and the economic model behind so much of technology is to basically try to build something, that addresses a problem met by people, and to then seek this external investment that allows for these startups to scale. And what ends up happening is they give over equity to the people financing the startups. And anybody who gives money or invests money in something is expecting a return at some point. So, no money is free. And when a startup takes investment capital like seed funding or Series A, Series B, those investors expect to get paid back at some point. And the traditional VC-based startup model, is premised on two possible exits. One exit is acquisition, where the startup sells to a bigger company. And the other exit is initial public offering, so going public. And these are these two moments where the venture capitalists are able to get paid back. And both of these moments mark, a shifting in the responsibilities of that startup, and who in fact is that company is incentivized to reward. And there's also investment models where the investors expect to see revenue and profit sharing, which is likely the case with Sniffies and the 100 million investment that they've taken from Match Group. So what ends up happening to these startups is, by taking on venture capital, they have a responsibility to paying the people back and to making more money. And how do companies make more money? By charging the users more, by enshittifying the experience to generate more app revenue, by selling people's data, turning the users into a product. So I think that there's so many misaligned incentives embedded within the venture capital model that it's interesting to explore alternative ways that technology can be built to serve its users rather than to serve external investors. And so with Meetmarket, and for 8 years, I've been researching alternative economic models for technology and thinking about how communities can build and manage and operate their own tech. And I've looked at a lot of different options, and I was very inspired by the platform cooperative movement, which is about cooperative ownership of digital platforms. But the way that I'm thinking about Meetmarket is, rather than, there's this very interesting platform called, I blank on the name, but anyways, it's like a cooperative of musicians. And I think in this case, like a Spotify type platform, it makes a lot of sense for the people who are doing the work, the workers, to be co-owning and benefiting from the value produced by this platform. But for Meetmarket, I think it's more interesting to think about how to create a responsibility to the wider queer community rather than just creating value for, maybe the early members of the platform. And so I've been really inspired by something called the Steward Ownership movement, and famous examples of it are Patagonia. They did this in the recent past, and basically there's levels of complexity to steward ownership, but it creates a legal responsibility for the company to be pursuing a certain purpose, and it makes it impossible for that company to go against this purpose. And so with Meetmarket, what I'm going to do is set up the company with a non-economic share that provides veto rights over specific moves that the company might make. So taking venture capital money over a controlling threshold, going against the no advertising principle, no selling out, needing to block any type of sale company would make. And so in this way, Meetmarket will have to, for its, life, uphold these principles. And because the non-economic share, it's also called a golden share, and that will be held by a nonprofit entity. And it basically creates these checks and balances. So that nonprofit then is making sure that the company isn't going against the principles that are outlined in the statutes.
So I'm really curious about this concept. And basically, I think that it's really revolutionary in a way compared to how other gay apps have been set up. So I assume that people can still sign up for free, right? They don't need to pay sort of like a subscription or pay to become sort of like a founding member or anything.
So currently the whole app is free, but it's, very much a prototype and an experiment. And I've been iterating with the early users on the way that it works and the, modes of interaction that the platform allows. What the plan is now is to build a full mobile app. And that app should also be free to use and enjoyable to use up to a certain point. I think a lot about this Pinterest style platform called Arena that is a community grounded bookmarking tool. They don't have any advertising or data tracking, and they have a very simple quota based paywall. So if you go over 200 bookmarks, then you have to pay for a subscription. And I want to do something simple for Meetmarket as well, where if you go over 25 message requests, currently there's this message request system. If you've sent or received more than 25, then you need to pay for a subscription, or you need to delete some of your contacts. So rather than serving people endless ads and, making their experience of using it bad, the goal should be that it's really enjoyable to use. People should want to pay. They should be using it a lot. And then at a certain point, it'll be like, okay, yeah, I need to contribute to the running of this platform.
So you mentioned your background a bit earlier, and I know that your background is in anthropology, and you also spent time looking into alternative groups with your incubator trust. Am I correct? How did your research into human behavior and community building actually change how you design Market?
I've done so much work in ways of using empirical inquiry. So anthropology is the study of humans and everything that they do. And it taught me to think critically about all of the things in life that we take for granted or that we think are normal. Everything humans do is not normal at all. It's like these are long histories of cultural practices that have developed through so many different forces and interactions and forms of cultural exchange. So I think anthropology taught me to understand the nuance that is at the core of social behavior more generally, to look at the details and to have a sensitivity towards how, why, with what effects people are doing things. And that very directly influences the way that I approach tech development more generally, because I think it's so much more interesting to think about what needs people have. How are the existing, whether it's services or platforms, meeting or not meeting those needs? And how could we do something to address them? So with Meetmarket, it comes initially from empirical evidence of like my own experience operating on these platforms, the experience of my peers and my friends, and just having a very negative experience and thinking about, okay, what would make this experience better? How could we build something that we'd actually enjoy using? Because it's ridiculous that we don't enjoy, I don't know anybody who enjoys using these big gay apps. Like everyone feels kind of cheap and gross and nobody acts like themselves. Suddenly we don't have a responsibility towards anybody. It kind of starts from this empirical experience, but now that there's other people involved, and I think, when I launched this prototype, I was expecting like 300 people to test it and to have a conversation with them about what works, what doesn't work, like maybe much more slowly than has ended up happening, because in 24 hours of launching this prototype, 15,000 people had jumped into it. And so
Amazing.
in the last 7 weeks, like 60,000 people have used it. And now I've launched a crowdfunding campaign. And with the people who have been involved, there's this like ongoing discussion about what works, what doesn't work. I'm going to do testing with them. I'm going to get feedback on things and to like make sure that the app we put out is something that, to the best of its abilities, meet the majority of people's needs in the best way that they can. So I think, anthropology influences my approach towards this like feedback and iteration process.
I'm curious if you believe that the way apps like Grindr or Sniffies, or I guess like all of the other gay apps out there, sort of influence how people behave within those apps. I assume that, looking at Grindr, like how basically like all of the features encourage you to, for example, like I guess some of the features would be like boosting your profile or like paying more so you can access more services. Do you think how an app is designed influences how people also behave within the app and also how we treat each other within the app?
I think 100%. These apps, like all society, have what are called affordances in more like academic terms. And these are the ways that the design of the thing encourages certain forms of interaction and behavior, like a door handle, like a slanty door handle affords pushing it down because of how it's. The same is said about digital platforms and interfaces more generally. There are so many affordances that like bring us to behave in certain ways and to feel in certain ways. And I think social media in general has been about the design of dopamine reward, because the goal of these apps as well that are serving advertising is to make sure that your eyeballs are glued to the app for as long as possible so that they serve you more and more hours of advertising. And so like Grindr especially is designed like a slot machine where they delay reward just enough to keep you hooked and to kind of, I think a lot about the online notification on profiles. If you send a user a message while they're offline, Grindr might turn on their online notification even while that user has not signed back into the app to make you feel like they might be ignoring you, to elicit this kind of like psychological stress response of thinking like, are they ghosting me? Are they not interested in me? And the app is designed to do this on so many different levels to keep you feeling bad and to keep you hooked to the app and to keep you questioning yourself. And it does not have to be this way. Like this is a company that makes their revenue was like $450 million last year. Their goal is to make money for people who own shares of Grindr, not to make our dopamine systems healthy and like to make us feel good. That is not their objective. Their objective is to keep us hooked to the app.
Interesting. What would you say though about, because I've heard some of the founders, not just for gay apps like Grindr or Sniffies, but like I guess like dating apps would say that this is what the people want and this is what they respond to. So we create it because this is, I guess, essentially what people want. What's your take on that?
I think that people want a lot of different things and people need a lot of different things. And just thinking about the gay apps that exist, there is not one that meets my needs. Like, and I'm addicted to my phone. Like I love a dopamine fueled interface just as much as the next girl. So I'm not saying that I don't want dopamine at all. Like, I think a lot about why Blue Sky just doesn't feel good for me. And I think it's because that linear feed just does not give me the dopamine hit that I am addicted to from these algorithmic feed platforms. So I think that ethical tech also like can still make things that are sexy and enjoyable to use. Like, we don't have to fix all the problems at the same time. I want to make an app that people want to use at the same time, doing things that are protecting people's privacy, are not manipulating their, self-worth and their need for validation, that are not selling people's data, that is, not going to be sold to an extractive buyer. Like, there's so many things that I want to do that are better than all the platforms. And I still think that we could do this in a way that is sexy and enjoyable to use. Like, it shouldn't be boring.
Speaking of ethical apps, and since we were talking about like how apps are designed, so Meetmarket is supposed to be decentralized, right? What does this mean for people, queer people living in dangerous environments? Like, let's say you live in a country where homosexuality is illegal. Like, how does decentralization play a part in protecting people's lives in those environments?
So I want to be clear that decentralization is a pretty vague term that can mean a lot of different things. And in, network theory, it means a computer system where data is stored across a network of computers rather than on a centralized server, which is the model that the web currently uses. But there's also ideas around decentralization for breaking down the ways in which power concentrates around companies or anything in the world. And so what Meetmarket currently uses is a decentralized identity system, which is similar to what Blue Sky is using with the AT protocol, that uses these decentralized identity identifiers, and that are cryptographic keys that are stored in a person's browser. So in the design of the system currently, Meetmarket doesn't have a database of everyone's email address and password because the cryptographic key is stored on people's browsers. And we have an email recovery that can work with the encrypted information that people already have, but we're not storing like passwords and email addresses linked to user accounts in that way. So there's a lot more research that I will do and I will work with experts to do on exactly how should Meetmarket be set up in a way where the tech isn't the message, the tech is in service of what we want it to be doing and hidden from people's experience so that it's still a usable, nice app. Because I think what often happens with decentralized tech or blockchain is there's so many layers of technical complexity and it's just not user friendly in any way. And that's definitely not the approach I want to take with Meetmarket, because we're never going to beat the big gay dating apps with an app that's too techy and hard to use. And I also want to not make any claims about hostile legal environments, because I also think that needs to be researched a lot more. But at the minimum, encryption is so important for this, because, today in the United States, for example, Google previously had claimed to users that they would notify them before giving their data over to law enforcement. And they recently backtracked on this, and Google was providing location data, login information, basically metadata. They weren't even providing the messages someone was sending, just providing the metadata to ICE about their users. And this is enough information for law enforcement to create a surveillance profile about people. And the way that you prevent this is by making sure that the digital platform has access to no personal data from people. Like, the platform should not have metadata about people's location that's being stored. Yeah, just everything needs to be thought about within this risk profile. And I think especially for queer people, you shouldn't have to trust the platform that your data is safe. It should be designed and it should be auditable, because the aspects of the code that are important for privacy should be open source or auditable. But Also, the claims can be verified. But I just think there's so much scope to bring this thinking to like the gay app space. Yeah, just to like with hostile legal environments in mind.
So, in one of your previous interviews, you mentioned that you've noticed that Meetmarket users are getting highly social. Do you think the queer community is suddenly pushing for both deep privacy and also platonic connection more than just hooking up on these online apps?
I personally am always interested in what sex means. Like what is intimacy? What is sex? What are all of these things? What's the beginning and end of a sexual relationship? Does flirting count as sex? Does your body language, like the way you look at each other, like, so my point being, I think that the ways that we speak to each other, the ways we reveal parts of ourselves to each other is so fundamental towards our sexual selves that the existing like dating apps in general really like purify out all of this nuance and kind of reduce it to the universal grid. And even just seeing the prototype of Meetmarket in the way that in 7 weeks, I looked today and I was shocked. They've sent over 130,000 messages to each other on Meetmarket. And I just think like this social component is so key towards the way that also like gay identity emerged in the 20th century. Like the scene, as it were, is just such a critical component of people's lives and especially like queer lives. To find a way of bringing that into the app is something that I find really exciting, which is why I've tried to, in the plan for the full app, to have these two components. Like, yes, you can have a fast, even transactional hookup if that's what you're looking for, but you can also have slower, more discussion oriented, like ways of socializing in threads or in channels. So I'd like to find a way of like bridging these two ways of being and socializing and forms of intimacy. And like, obviously they can ideally translate between each other. But yeah, I just think it's such a key thing that some of my best experience, like my most memorable experiences on Grindr, are when I have randomly ended up chatting with somebody in Marseille for like hours about like a very philosophical conversation about poly and open relationships. Like, I definitely remember that. I don't remember a lot of the random hookups that I've had.
Interesting. Speaking of that, I suppose that one of the criticisms for Grindr, for example, is the influx of bots and also like a lot of spam messages. And I would say that they've been previously attacked as well for basically implementing discriminatory filters. Like, for example, you can filter. I remember there was a time when you can actually filter for race, if I remember correctly. How do you plan to differ from that? Like, how does Meetmarket plan to sort of prevent those from happening or replicating the mistakes that the other apps have done before?
So I did this poll on my Instagram a month ago of like, what are the issues people have with the main gay apps? And the number one thing people said was adverts. And then the second thing people said was bots and fakes. And then the third thing people said was the paywall. So I have been doing a lot of research into different, more like peer-to-peer verification systems. And I've done a lot of research in the past on blockchain, and there's some interesting work there on ideas that they call like proof of humanity. And these like decentralized account verification or humanity verification systems. And I also was looking at WeChat, which, the biggest messaging platform in China. And they actually use this QR code based verification system where anybody who wants to use WeChat has to have their QR code scanned by an existing member. And, this is their way of trying to just create a little bit of a hurdle in like scammers producing like tons of fake accounts and being able to always connect one account to another account. So you have this chain that can help you assess the reputation of the accounts that are coming in. And while I don't want Meetmarket, especially initially, to only be usable for verified users, I think that having this kind of like simple like human to human, person to person verification process would do a lot to cut down on the amount of bots and scams and like illicit activity that you see on platforms like Sniffies and Grindr. So it's an experiment. I think, like, as I was mentioning with the way I like to approach tech development and anthropology, I think these are all things that need to be tested and evaluated, and to never see Meetmarket as a finished design, but as something that constantly improving and making new versions of. And was there another part of your question?
No, that's basically it. But as a last question, Meetmarket has, I assume that you have a lot of users now from all over the world, not just within Europe, but I assume that you also have, I think, I remember seeing some users from the Philippines as well, and some users that are basically outside, I would say like out of the Western world. How do you plan to ensure that there is also inclusivity with how Meetmarket is designed, and that, people from outside Europe or outside the Western world would also have a say in how this app is designed?
I think that it's been so exciting to see already how many people in how many different places have heard about Meetmarket and have engaged with it and are feeling similarly about the messed up world of gay apps that we have. And I was analyzing the people who have contributed to the funding campaign that I'm running. It's like over 100 countries, like a lot of one-off people, but it's like a lot of places. And in like when I launched the first prototype, there were people in Malaysia who were writing me, people in Indonesia,
Interesting.
people in Ukraine, people in Saudi Arabia, people in Brazil. So it's definitely like intended to be a global platform. I think the challenge of anything like this is creating enough reason for people to be on there when it's small and when it doesn't have the 15 million monthly active users like Grindr has. So that's something that I need to, take into account. But I do think there's so much scope for doing targeted things in different places where there are people who are interested. And I also want to run different like research groups. So starting initially with some trans women in Berlin, and to just think about like what are the things that they need to feel safe and excited on this app. And I think that there's a lot of scope for similar types of, like focus groups or discussion groups with people in different places to think about how could this meet the needs of that place. And then I also think that I've just been really inspired by finding ways of almost like hacking the gay dating app model. And right, Grindr made like $320 million in profit last year, even with like the smallest fraction of that.
I read the news.
We could do so many cool things with like a tiny fraction of that profit. And I want to start this scene fund that takes revenue from Meetmarket and redirects it towards IRL events that happen in places. And so, yeah, ideally finding a way for that to be available in tons of different places could also be another way that Meetmarket is not only focused on the Euro-American core, but, actively pursuing things in different places. And yeah, I mean, I was excited to do this interview because I know you're from the Philippines, and like I think there's so much exciting queer culture in the Philippines.
There is, and we're very loud online, I would say.
Like I want to go to the Philippines and do karaoke. That's my dream.
You should do more events in the Philippines and get the queer community involved, because they would make this trend online. I'm pretty sure.
That would be so cool.
But okay, I know I said it was the last question, but just a very direct question. Is the vision taking Grindr down?
I think that there's a lot of space in this market to carve out a corner. I think that Grindr has so many resources behind it. Yeah, I think that we should definitely take a large share of their subscribers. We should make it very difficult for them to continue extracting and abusing queer people, I think.
Thank you, Don. And best of luck with Meetmarket. I definitely support the idea.
Thank you so much.